Follow along, Catholic Pilgrims, as we follow French doctor of the Church, St. Francis de Sales, through his book, Introduction to the Devout Life. Tune in as we read through this practical guide for living out the Catholic faith well. Welcome back, Catholic Pilgrims. Today our topic is on spiritual dryness, something that most of us feel at one time or another. It's also something that many of the saints dealt with in their lives. I belong to a book club, and we recently had our October meeting to discuss the book All That Remains. It's a book by a forensic anthropologist from Scotland. Our group had a great discussion, but towards the end, one of the ladies brought up a controversial topic that was in the book, doctor, quote-unquote, assisted suicide. I didn't think anybody was going to bring it up, and I had actually kind of forgotten about it being in the book. The author is all for it, by the way, something that I strongly disagree with. Anyway, each of the ladies there was mostly supportive of it, except me. So I knew that I had to speak up. What does quote-unquote doctor-assisted suicide have to do with spiritual dryness? Well, I'll reflect on that after we hear from St. Francis. So let's open our books to chapter 14 of the fourth part. Chapter 14. Dryness and Spiritual Barrenness. I have given you instructions for the times of consolation, but such pleasant seasons will not always endure. On the contrary, at times you will be so deprived and destitute of all devout feeling that you will imagine your soul to be a desert, fruitless, sterile land, wherein is no path or road leading to God, nor any water springs of grace which can moisten the dryness that threatens to reduce it to dust. Alas, the soul that experiences this is truly to be pitied, above all, when the distress is pressing. For then, like David, tears are her meat day and night, whilst Satan mocks her with 1,000 suggestions, hoping to reduce her to despair, and inquiring, "Where is now thy God? How wilt thou find him? Who will restore to thee the joy of his holy grace?" What are you to do then? Take good heed whence the evil arises. We ourselves are often the cause of our own dryness and barrenness. Just as a mother refuses to give sugar to her sick child, so God deprives us of spiritual consolations if they arouse a vain complacency within us and cause our souls to be spiritually sick. It is well for me, O my God, that thou humblest me, for before I was afflicted, I went astray. Again, if we neglect to profit by the sweetness and delight of God's love whilst he grants it, he will withdraw it as a punishment of our indolence. Those Israelites who did not gather the manna in the morning could no longer find it, for when the sun waxed hot, it melted. Sometimes we repose on the bed of sensual delights and perishable consolation, even as the bride in the canticles. The bridegroom of our heart knocks at the door of our soul and excites us to resume our spiritual activity, but we parley with him because we are unwilling to forsake our vain pleasures and false delights. Therefore, he withdraws himself, and when we seek him, it is hard to find him. And truly, we have deserved that it should be so, since we have been so disloyal and faithless to his love as to refuse it for the love of the world. If you seek the flesh of Egypt, you will not receive the manna of heaven. Bees detest all artificial scents, and the sweetness of the Holy Spirit cannot be combined with the deceitful pleasures of the world. Sometimes spiritual dryness and barrenness are produced by the practice of duplicity and provocation in confession and communication with your director. For if you lie to the Holy Ghost, what marvel is it that he refuses you his consolations? If you will not be simple and sincere as a little child, you cannot have the sweet reward of childlike simplicity. And so if you have steeped your heart in worldly gratifications, no wonder that spiritual delights have lost their charm. The Blessed Virgin said, "He hath filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he hath sent away empty." Those who are rich in the pleasures of the world have no taste for such as are spiritual. If you have carefully preserved the fruit of past consolations, they will doubtless be renewed. For to him that hath much shall more be given. But from him that hath not, who through his own fault has lost what was given him, shall be taken away even that which he hath, that is, those favors which were prepared for him. Rain refreshes those plants which are alive, but it destroys all lingering vitality in those which are not, and causes them to perish and decay. For these several causes, then, we lose our spiritual consolations and sink into dryness and mental sterility. Carefully examine your conscience and see whether you discover any such faults, but do so without anxiety or undue painstaking, and having faithfully considered your conduct. If you discover the root of the evil to be in yourself, thank God, for the evil is half cured when you have ascertained the cause. But if, on the contrary, you do not discover any especial cause for such dryness, do not yield to a more prying research. Without further effort, simply follow these rules. Number 1. Humble yourself profoundly before God, acknowledging your misery and nothingness. Alas, what am I when left to myself? Nothing better, O Lord, than a dry ground which by its cracks and crevices testifies how it thirsts after the rain of heaven, whilst yet the wind disperses its soil and dust. Number 2. Call upon God and ask his gladness. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation. My Father, if it be possible, let this chalice pass from me. Depart, O cold, unfruitful wind that driest up my soul, and come, O south wind, blow through my garden, and let the aromatical spices thereof flow. Number 3. Go to your confessor. Open your soul entirely to him. Reveal to him thoroughly all the faults of your heart, and receive his counsels with the utmost simplicity and humility. For God, who very highly esteems obedience, often blesses the advice we receive from others, especially from the guides of souls, even when such a result appears but unlikely, just as he caused Naaman to receive healing in the river Jordan, whither Eliseus had sent him, without any human probability of success. Number 4. But after all, no course is so good or so useful amid such dryness and sterility as not to yield to, and be over-eager in, the wish for deliverance from them. I do not mean that you may not wish to be delivered, but that you must not passionately desire it, but place yourself at the entire disposal of God's providence, willing that he should do what he will with you amidst your thorns and your desires. At such seasons say, O my Father, if it be possible, let this chalice pass from me. But do not fail to add with all your heart, not my will, but thine be done. And in that repose as tranquilly as possible. For when God beholds in us this holy submission, he will console us with graces and favors, as when he saw Abraham resolve to sacrifice his son Isaac. He was content with his perfect and entire resignation, and comforted him with a holy vision and with abundant blessings. Therefore, in all manner of afflictions, whether bodily or spiritual, and in all distraction or loss of fervent devotion, we should say with our whole heart and with the deepest submission, The Lord gave my consolations, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. If we persevere in such humility, he will restore to us his gracious favor, as he did to Job, who ever thus received all his trials. Number 5. Finally, amidst all our dryness and barrenness, let us be of good courage, and waiting patiently for the return of consolations, let us go on our way. Let us omit no devotional exercise, but rather, if possible, increase our good works. And if we cannot bring fresh fruits to our beloved, let us at least offer those that are dry. For to him all are the same, so long as they are offered by a heart wholly resolved to love him. When the spring is fine, the bees abound more in honey than in young, for they devote themselves rather to gathering honey than to the propagation of their race. But if the spring be cloudy and cold, they increase their young the more, not being able to go forth in search of honey. Thus, frequently, the soul finds itself in the bright springtime of spiritual consolations, and in her eagerness to enjoy and amass them, she slackens in the performance of good works. Whilst, on the contrary, in proportion as she finds herself deprived of the pleasures of devotion, so much does she multiply her good works, and abounds in the inward increase, of virtue, patience, humility, self-renunciation, resignation, and self-abnegation. It is then a great mistake, and one to which women are especially liable, to imagine that a tasteless, emotionless, cold service is less acceptable to God. Since our actions are like the rose, which is more pleasing when it is fresh, but has a more powerful scent when it is dry. So although those works which we perform with a kindled heart are more agreeable to us, who consider only our own gratification, yet, if they are performed amidst drought and barrenness, they are more costly and fragrant unto God. And that because in seasons of dryness, our will makes us serve God as if it were by main force, and consequently our service is more vigorous and faithful than in a milder season. There is little merit in serving a prince amidst the pleasures of peace and the delights of a court. But to serve him amidst the hardships of war, amidst trials and persecutions, that is a true sign of faithfulness and constancy. Blessed Angela of Foligno says that the prayer most acceptable to God is that which is made forcibly and with constraint, that is, which we undertake not from our own taste or inclination, but solely in order to please God, to which we are, as it were, driven by our will, conquering and doing violence to the repugnance and dryness which we feel. It is the same as regards all other good works, for the more reluctance we feel towards their performance, be it external or internal, so much the more precious and estimable are they in the sight of God. The less self-interest we have in the pursuit of virtue, the greater therein will be the purity and brightness of divine love. The child embraces his mother when she gives him sugar, but it is a greater sign of love if he embrace her when she has given him wormwood or chamomile. The strongest argument for quote-unquote doctor-assisted suicide is that it will end the deep suffering for many people. The ladies at my book club found it to be compassionate and a way for a person to end their life with quote-unquote dignity. They get to decide when they go. And one lady commented, "Nobody wants to be a burden on their family. Nobody wants to be wetting the bed and drooling, losing all dignity, and having their family see them like that. It's better for them to be able to end it before they become a burden." One lady, though, the youngest in the group, said, "I do think it might not be bad, but there's just something in me that says this might remove, our service to each other. Something just feels off a bit to me." And that's when I knew I could break in, because she was on to something. And I said, "You're keying in on one of the reasons that assisted suicide is bad. When we try to control death by quote-unquote taking it into our own hands or quote-unquote dying with dignity, we are removing the acts of love that others can provide. By sterilizing death, you in effect remove the opportunity to love." And let me give you an example. Growing up, I knew that my grandmothers loved my grandpas. Towards the end of my grandfather's lives, though, they became extremely sick. Both lived into their 90s. One of my grandpas had dementia and became bedridden, and the other one was very sick and required constant care. Both of my grandmas refused to put them in nursing homes. They instead took care of them until their dying day, and that was the greatest act of love I have ever witnessed in my life. It was tiresome, burdensome, a huge cross, but they never stopped loving my grandpas. In fact, it was when their true love showed up. Our lives are not our own. God will take us when it is time, but we are meant to care for each other even when it's burdensome. We can't have people wanting to die or think that it's better to kill themselves just because they don't want other people to see them as a burden. Now, I went on to say a lot of other things, but my point in telling all this is that it's like spiritual dryness. My grandmothers weren't feeling loved or receiving good feelings from my grandfathers towards the end of their lives. It wasn't a fun time. They often cried over how difficult it was, but every single day they showed up. They showed up and they loved my grandpas. It truly was the most beautiful thing. St. Francis says, quote, "It is then a great mistake, and one to which women are especially liable, to imagine that a tasteless, emotionless, cold service is less acceptable to God, since our actions are like the rose, which is more pleasing when it is fresh, but has a more powerful scent when it is dry. So although those works which we perform with a kindled heart are more agreeable to us, who consider only our own gratification, yet if they are performed amidst drought and barrenness, they are more costly and fragrant unto God. But that because in seasons of dryness, our will makes us serve God, as if it were by main force, and consequently our service is more vigorous and faithful than in a milder season. There is little merit in serving a prince amidst the pleasures of peace and the delights of a court, but to serve him amidst the hardships of war, amidst trials and persecutions, that is a true sign of faithfulness and constancy." Unquote. My grandmother's love at the end of my grandpa's lives were like a dried rose, powerful in its fragrance. When things are dry in our spiritual life, when it feels barren, but we still show up for God, that is where true love is found. It is at that point that you aren't doing it for the emotional gratification that you receive, but strictly for love of God, and that means everything. Just as my grandmother's devoted love at the end meant everything and added dignity to my grandfather's lives, and it means everything to me. And it was a most beautiful witness. So, if things get dry, and you even feel like you are just going through the motions in your spiritual life, keep at it. Keep showing up. God will reward you. That is all for today, Catholic Pilgrims. I'll see you back here soon. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.